Training camp begins tomorrow. A lot of excitement following the most exciting offseason in Houston Texans history. How in the hell did we get here? Let's cover it all in the locker room with a special guest.
Yeah. It's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey, locker room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source. We the pulse of the city too.
Welcome to the locker room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2, Sports Radio 610, and the Odyssey app, which is going to be very useful. Always is, and it damn sure has been during the offseason, but it's going to be very useful starting tomorrow when training camp begins, because the Houston Texans are going to be on the field. I'm going to be on the field. Hell, I'm going to be on the 50-yard line. I'm going to be talking to players exclusively, not at the podium, exclusive interviews. Going to bring those to you, coaches, etc. That's the case throughout the season. Channel began about 10 months ago, and it's been a hell of a ride. Appreciate everyone for coming through, subscribing, liking, all that type of stuff. And I look forward to the best days of covering this team being ahead. And quite frankly, there's never bad days when you're covering an NFL squad. But it does seem like this organization is functioning like a big-time organization, which probably couldn't even say that 8 months ago. Couldn't say it 9 months ago, but we've been able to say that now. And let's kind of relive how we got here and revisit the most exciting offseason in Houston Texans history with a special guest friend of mine, Cody Stutes, joins me now. Cody Stutes of Houston Football and Cody Stutes on YouTube. Cody, how you living? Congrats on the new stuff going on. Look forward to following your coverage. Give the people the website. And there are very few people who I would rather, kind of reset the excitement that we've been through than you.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. And the folks have clamored for more and more of this, and there's going to be plenty of this. But we're scheduling home and homes on the YouTubes like college football teams are scheduling out 10 years in advance. We got some big stuff planned on your channel and, of course, on my channel. And the new website that I just launched this week, HOUfootball.com. Houston Football is the name of the site. We're going to cover the Texans a ton. Every which way we can cover them, and it's going to be fantastic. Of course, I've got the YouTube page as well. And, man, you talked about it. It has been a wild ride to go from where this team was, a year ago, 16 months ago, to where they are now, and to feel as good about this team as I do feel heading into this training camp is not something I could have foreseen a year ago.
No, and like I said, I don't think you could have foreseen it maybe 7 months ago. But there were signs that, the best was yet to come. There was always healthy skepticism. I think there still is healthy skepticism. This organization hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt. So, there's not going to be fans just sitting there, holding them at their every word and anticipating it. But there is substance. You do have a head coach who most organizations wanted throughout the process. So it will be fun. Let's just kind of revisit it. Let's just go through everything that's gone on to get us to this point. But before we do, let's talk about the breaking news. CJ Stroud, he signs his contract with the Texans. I guess he gets the signing bonus up front. Mm-hmm. He gets it all up front, which I'm not going to lie. I'm not a cap expert. Texans cap is my salary nerd, my salary savior, my salary Jesus, if you will. I just assume that you always got your signing bonus up front. So I had no idea.
I feel like you usually get a lot of it. I don't know if you always get all of it. That feels like, what CJ Stroud got. And from reading people like Texans cap, kind of the Texans breaking tradition. But hey, when you draft a quarterback that high, the quarterback makes the rules. You don't make the rules. You operate the way the quarterbacks get treated, not the way that other positions get treated. So makes sense. And I don't know what I'd be doing if I was in my early 20s and somebody handed me $20+ million, but I'd be having one hell of a time. That's for sure.
Yeah. You just put it in the bank and you just let it stop. It just multiplies instead of getting it later. I guess. And look, with the way that contracts are right now for rookies, they're pretty much on a scale. So you do something that's never been done before, regardless of how significant it is or isn't. It's cool to be somewhat of a trendsetter. So I'm sure that David Mulligeta's happy. I'm sure that CJ Stroud's happy, and never really in doubt. And we will get to see what goes on with CJ Stroud and how that goes. I actually have a video talking about this and talking about CJ Stroud's comp. If you want to check that out on the channel, along with all kinds of CJ Stroud stuff throughout the year. Let's go through kind of how we got to this point, how the Texans became what we believe is a functionable organization, an organization that functions or that at least resembles a big boy football organization, starting with the end of 2022, which was not an ideal. The end of the 2022 season was not an ideal ending. You thought they were going to have the first pick. They ended up blowing the first pick. You thought Lovie Smith would be fired. You wondered, though, there was talk about, perception. Can the Houston Texans afford the perception that they fired two coaches, one and done? Would that prevent them from doing that? They handled that perfectly. And I thought that was the first clue of the Texans knowing what they were doing. They didn't overthink it like I think they did the McCown Lovie Smith situation. They fired Lovie Smith on Sunday. They went about their business, and the coaching search begun. Now, there was still some national media that were saying things that I thought was just outlandish. That just seems to kind of disappeared. But the way in which they handled the Lovie Smith situation, I thought that was the first maybe small clue that the Texans knew what the hell they were doing, and they handled the situation appropriately outside of the whole Indianapolis thing and that whole thing, Nick Caserio letting Brandon Cooks play and all that.
Well, especially after the crap that they pulled the previous year with David Culley, where they sent that man out there and he had no idea if he was the coach or not, and he had to go to a press conference
on a Wednesday.
Yeah. So, especially after the way they handled things the previous year, to go in there, take care of Lovie Smith. Hey, thanks for everything. See you later. Here's your big check on the way out the door. Adios. And they got to work real quick. And I'm sure Caserio at that moment had a pretty short list of who he really wanted. And I can remember you being live that night. I can remember being live on YouTube that night. And I think it became pretty quickly apparent that there was going to be a groundswell of support for DeMeco Ryans. That was one of the first names that popped into my head when Lovie was shown the door. And it was a very, very quick start to that coaching search. And, you're right, a little bit of a operating like a normal NFL franchise after so many years of not operating like a normal NFL franchise.
Yeah. And then the coaching search begun. And during that coaching search, leading up to the coaching search, Cal McNair and Hannah McNair actually joined my radio show In the Loop on Sports Radio 610. Download the Odyssey app. We talked to Cal and Hannah. We talked to players. They joined the radio show and seemed pretty relaxed. Kind of felt like, they said they were going to have a bigger hand in things. They seemed to feel like they had a better grasp of things. And I just flat out asked them, how much different is this than the previous two that you've had the 2 years prior? This is what Cal and Hannah said.
Have the changes that have been made up to this point that might have been around the last 2 years, have they made this coaching search, for lack of a better term, a little bit less stressful?
Yes. Oh, wait, I should have paused.
Yeah, we're excited with where we are. We're excited about our future, and we've had to work through some stuff to get here, and some of it has been a little bit difficult, but we're excited. We're extremely excited to be where we are right now.
So then the coaching search began, and immediately all of the names were being interviewed by the Texans. All of the top names that you would have wanted to have interviewed, including Sean Payton, were interviewing with the Texans. But there was one guy who it seemed like a lot of Texans fans wanted. Now, there were some who wanted an offensive-minded coach, so they were thinking Shane Steichen, Mike Kafka, Sean Payton, but there was one guy, D'Amico Ryans, who was very popular. It seemed like a lot of people wanted D'Amico Ryans, but there was talk. There was talk from fans. There was talk from media members. And there was even a report that maybe D'Amico Ryans would not be interested in this gig. I flat out asked Cal and Hannah if there were any candidates that had shown no interest, and this is what they had to say.
What has the interest been like? Like, have you had any candidates say no?
No.
None at all.
No.
So there you go. And then the D'Amico Ryans roller coaster ride began. The Texans interviewed him. The Broncos interviewed him. There was talk about, timelines, when it was going to happen. But I would say probably a week before it was going to go down, it became pretty apparent that D'Amico Ryans was going to be the guy. And you could tell immediately that this was the right decision. This completely changed the way the Texans were looked at. And it was an exciting process. And I think when we look back, no matter what happens with all the other stuff that we're going to get into that got us to this point, one day away from camp, this decision, this process, and the way in which this played out, regardless of what the results are, this was the beginning of the Houston Texans becoming an organization that went from the butt of all the jokes to a respected organization around the NFL in a very short time.
And this was a really deep and solid group of coaches as well. You think about the defensive coordinator of the NFC champion, the offensive coordinator of the NFC champion, a Super Bowl champion in Sean Payton. Now, his situation is a little bit different because you had to give up some compensation if you were indeed going to get him. But D'Amico Ryans, coming off of the success that he had, the first time that the Lions looked like they were competent on offense, totality as an offense in a long time, their offensive coordinator was in the mix. You had Frank Reich as a guy who had a lot of success and people thought highly of that was in the mix. And there was a lot of really good coaching candidates in this cycle. And for the Texans to end up with the only candidate that every team wanted to talk to is such a great feeling when you find out that D'Amico's picking you. And it's even better that along the way, he basically said, yeah, thanks, no thanks, Carolina. Yeah, thanks, no thanks, Arizona. Thanks, no thanks, Indianapolis. Okay, appreciate your interest, but I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And then ultimately he talks with Denver. He has the offers on the table, I'm guessing, between the two organizations, and it felt like a no-brainer for D'Amico Ryans. Like, it felt like as he was looking at the situation, it's like, I got to go to Houston. Like, this makes a lot of sense for me. This is the way that I need to operate for the rest of my career. And it showed a lot about Nick Caserio, because I believe, and I felt this way to an extent, a lot of people expected Caserio to have one or two guys pegged before the entire cycle goes on, and then ultimately they're going to end up with one of those two guys. Jonathan Gannon was one of the guys, and then I don't know exactly who you would say the other candidate would be. I mean, Steichen feels like a guy that would have fit pretty well with Caserio as well, but it did feel like maybe Gannon was the leader initially because, hey, Nick Caserio, talk to this guy. It got close last year. Now it works out. Maybe there's a better situation. Maybe Gannon's a lot more interested. And ultimately, Caserio, who's a part of the process and one of the biggest decision makers in that process, obviously not the ultimate one, but one of the biggest ones, he arrives at D'Amico Ryans as well. And I can believe him when he says that in public. Like, I don't get the vibe or the sense that Caserio's lying to us when he's like, yeah, we all decided that this was the guy for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he might have been nudged in that direction. And, maybe it is kind of leaving his comfort zone. And we'll get into the Caserio chatter as we continue to revisit how we got to where we are right now, one sleep away from training camp, the ultimate training camp preview here in the locker room, Landry Locker, Cody Stutes. But they got there. And it seems to work out. These were
tell how much the opportunity meant to him, D'Amico Ryans could have had any of the open jobs. I mean, he very well could have had any of those open jobs if he decided to go in there, interview, and he probably was at the top of a lot of people's candidate list. And for him to have options, pare down the options to 2 teams, and then ultimately pick the organization that drafted him, and for him to pick the Texans, that's not just nostalgia. That's not just good feelings that gets D'Amico Ryans here. He had to have gotten in the building, gotten into the conversation with this team, and felt like, yep, they're going to go in a direction that I could see myself going as well. And we're going to be successful together. The way that they want to build this thing, the way that I'm going to bring myself to what I'm going to bring to the table. Like, it was not just, oh, well, hey, it's the Texans. They drafted me. That's why I'm going back. Like, there had to be a belief in the way this team is going to operate going forward. And that's one of the big things too. It's like, yes, there's a little bit of extra with Houston for D'Amico Ryans, but when it came to the football, when it came to the future, when it came to putting this thing together and being successful in the next few seasons, he believed in the vision and the way he could execute his vision as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it with D'Amico is that I truly believe that he wanted to be here. Like, I truly believe that he wanted to be here. He didn't settle. It wasn't a situation where you're bringing in a coach that no one else would hire. He truly wanted to be here. And it wasn't, it seems almost like it's his dream job. And not saying that the criticism wasn't valid of the Texans before, but it did seem like, he wasn't at least listening to kind of all the other noise and stuff like that. And he still could kind of see the good in this organization when it would have been easy to grab some low hanging fruit and say, I'm not interested. But he proved immediately that that was not the case. As soon as he was hired, though, the next big decision and the next big talking point was, well, who's going to be his offensive coordinator? Defensive coordinator, who cares? Like, they got Matt Burke. Who cares? They ended up keeping Frank Ross as special teams coach. That was a no-brainer. But were we going to see a new offensive staff? What was the offense going to look like? What was the scheme going to be? They went through a process. One of the more under-the-radar polarizing things that happened in the offseason was the Cliff Kingsbury job interview. You had Kingsbury interviewing. And then you had Bobby SLOWIK, which is the direction in which they ended up going. They bring in Bobby SLOWIK, who went to San Francisco with D'Amico Ryans, had some pro football focus experience, has ties with the Shanahan family, and the Kubiak/Shanahan/McVay scheme is coming to Houston. And I think a lot of people were very excited about that. Only big question was, who the hell is the quarterback going to be? And we'll get to that in just a second.
I was in favor of Kingsbury, and I actually preferred him to Bobby SLOWIK. And I was pretty excited about the idea of Kingsbury being the offensive coordinator. He called plays at the NFL level. He'd had a lot of success on offense. I know the teams overall weren't that successful, but some of the challenges that Kingsbury dealt with in Arizona, he was successful. Kyler Murray improved those first few seasons under Kingsbury before things sort of fell apart there. And I wonder ultimately if the comfort level with the style of offense is just so much higher with the Shanahan style of offense than it is with what Kingsbury was going to run. And then that helped Bobby SLOWIK really, edge out Cliff Kingsbury. Because when you look at the resumes, you look at the resumes and what they've done in football from a coaching standpoint, it's not even close. It's not even close. Cliff Kingsbury's resume, when you're just looking at the resumes, blows Bobby SLOWIK's away. But with SLOWIK, there's potential. There's a high floor usually to that Shanahan style of offense. And when a Kingsbury offense ain't working, it ain't working, and it falls apart in a hurry. And Bobby SLOWIK is the way.
How is that a clear, better resume, though?
Well, Cliff Kingsbury,
but that would be like saying Lovie Smith's resume was 100 times better than D'Amico Ryans to me. Like, if you say it like that.
Well, no, because you're it's a different situation because you're talking to the quarterback, you're calling plays, and Cliff Kingsbury called plays for one of the best quarterback seasons in the history of college football, and he parlayed that into calling plays for Mahomes. And I go back to Patrick Mahomes talking about Cliff Kingsbury and explaining how they'd sit together on Sundays and they would watch Aaron Rodgers and they diagram the play the way Rodgers ran it. And then they would translate that play into the Texas Tech playbook. And I always thought about how that was important. And even going back to the quarterback show that just aired, Mahomes talked about how he was always watching Aaron Rodgers. And then I got to thinking, man, him and Kingsbury sit together on Sundays and just talk ball and diagram plays. And Mahomes came in, and yes, Andy Reid's obviously an offensive god, and he deserves the majority of the credit. But Mahomes had a good, solid base to work off of because of working with Kingsbury. And then he got fired in college and parlayed it into an NFL job because he had a working knowledge of how to operate with a young quarterback.
Yeah, the SLOWIK is incomplete, but I wouldn't look at Cliff Kingsbury and say that's a no-brain, hire him as an offensive coordinator.
Well, hold on. He called 3 of the best offenses in college football.
I don't care about that. So did Mike Leach. I don't care about air raid football.
And then his rookie quarterback at the NFL level got better for the first 3 seasons. That's Bobby SLOWIK had never called plays. The resume is there's not even a question about it.
It's incomplete, but I don't think it was
I'm obviously comparing a guy that's been in the NFL and a head coach to a guy that's never called plays. The resume is going to lose that way. Sure.
Right. Yeah. The SLOWIK thing will be interesting. The jury will be out. We'll see what happens. We'll see what it looks like. But at this point, I think a lot of people were happy that system was coming back, except Cody Stutes, who wanted Cliff Kingsbury's Oakley shades
again.
H-Town.
Bobby SLOWIK is the way the NFL's going. He coached under an offensive mastermind. He was in line to either be the second in command or the third in command helping that offense. And those guys have branched out and turned into head coaches all across this league and turned into offensive coordinators all across this league. SLOWIK is the way the NFL is going. I'm just telling you, I preferred Kingsbury to SLOWIK as he's still a bit of an unknown.
So we get to free agency, and the philosophy is clear. No long-term deals, but the quality of free agent, because you do have more cap space. You do have a little bit more of an appealing situation. You could see the quality of the free agent improving. You've brought in a hell of a lot of starters. You've improved your secondary with Jimmy Ward. Also signed Shaq Griffin. Who knows what his role is going to be. You brought in some linebackers. You brought in some beef on the D-line, a little Sheldon Rankins action, a little Denzel Perryman at linebacker, among other guys. Offensively, you traded for Shaq Mason. You gave him an extension. You signed Dalton Schultz, who I don't think we anticipated them being a factor in. So you improved the tight end position. Brought in wide receiver Robert Woods, who's familiar with this system. Some depth at running back, Devin Singletary. Wide receiver Noah Brown as well. How would you assess the free agency? I think they've improved. I don't even know that that's debatable. And I think in almost every area, you can say that they got better. Jury probably still a little bit out, though, on the wide receivers.
But you had so many holes, you can't fix everything all at once. And I almost would never look to free agency to fix my wide receiver problem. It seems to so rarely pay off in your investment in that wide receiver and ultimately what they bring to you on the field. And so free agency is just not where you fix the wide receiver spot. Yeah, you can put a Band-Aid on things, but you don't actually get together and put together a long-term plan with free agent wide receivers very often in the NFL. So you got a lot of holes, and they filled quite a few of them. I mean, to get a starting defensive tackle and a starting tight end in free agency with the level of play that those guys have, and then to really demonstrate to not only Sheldon Rankins, but also Dalton Schultz, hey, 2 years ago, Malik Collins was in your situation. And now Malik Collins has had multiple extensions with us, and he's hanging around for a while. And if you play well, we're going to take care of you too. It's kind of that's something that they showcased. I like the bounce back potential of Denzel Perryman. And then I like some of the depth pieces that they added as well, highlighted by Devin Singletary as that backup running back. You got to take the workload off of Dameon Pierce at some point. And this guy, yes, I understand the hope is that he's a bell cow. San Francisco offenses use the second running back quite a bit. In fact, they use the second and third running back more than a lot of other offenses. And Dameon Pierce he's never played as much football as he's about to play. Like, I understand he maybe could have come back at the end of last year.
Last year was the most that he played.
Yeah, but he blew past his what he had previously done in a football season, and he's going to go blow past that again this year if he's healthy. So I really liked free agency. It started a little slow, and then the next thing you know, it felt like they were getting maybe a little bit expensive on a player here or there, but it felt like a real potential for a lot of bargains coming out of this free agency class.
Yeah, Sheldon Rankins. I think the projection was about 9. I think they went to about 11.
Yeah.
Jimmy Ward, I think, the extra year, I think it's worth it. I think there's like some hidden value there as well. But I mean, you needed to improve in a lot of areas. I think you did. How much, we will see. But I think specifically on offense outside of the wide receivers, you did a good job of hopefully improving your offensive line with Mason. The tight end position, something that they need to improve on. And running back, you can't have Rex Burkhead as your backup running back. Then we get the build up to the draft. Right before the draft, we have the Nick Caserio chatter. Michael Lombardi, who knows Nick Caserio, he throws out the it really wasn't a report. It was what I'm hearing, hearsay type of stuff. And then just common sense that this is a different situation for Nick Caserio. It's like something he hasn't experienced. You're dealing with a coach who probably has as much power as you do. I'm not saying it was invalid, but Caserio is human. So any of the things that Mike Lombardi said that, or any reservations that he said that Nick Caserio might have had, whether it's, not having as much control, not knowing as much about the offense, all that. Maybe it's true, but Nick Caserio is still there. Nick Caserio kind of answered those rumors as well. But it's Michael Lombardi, so you got to take it for like a grain of salt. But you also got to take into account that he does know Nick.
Well, you have to take into account that this is the Houston Texans, and weird stuff happens sometimes. I think that was one of those things. I mean, yes, I understand they had just hired DeMeco Ryans, and that was a successful coaching search, but this organization, off the general manager in the middle of the summer one time, and then handed the organization to a preacher in Bill O'Brien. So it's like this organization had some very outside the box operations before. And oh, by the way, Nick Caserio, if he felt like, he was being usurped or he couldn't work with DeMeco Ryans, or if you were getting the sense that Caserio felt like he was forced to hire DeMeco Ryans and he had some sort of option, then I suppose that's a valid conversation or a valid thought to have. But I never bought Nick Caserio leaving, because what was he like?
Leaving would have been crazy after that would have been crazy. That would have been surprising.
Where was he going that he was going to find a better situation than what he had now? And I understand there are situations that would welcome Nick Caserio and it'd be better, but like to have the level of input and say on the way that the team is run that he did, and like the rumors, especially the rumors about going back to New England, like, are you kidding me? When that's going to be a power vacuum post Belichick?
Tried to get out twice when they were really good.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, I do think DeMeco Ryans has the larger shelf life. Like, if stuff doesn't work out, they're not firing DeMeco, they're firing Caserio, or they're going to fire both. But I think it's going to be – I do think he has the longer shelf life. So I think a lot of this was just common sense. A lot of it was speculation. And
And
You know,
and
just flat
now
out leaving, it wouldn't have been his own decision. Let's be honest. Like, it would have been like him and D'Amico can't work together, and D'Amico, the tie is going to go to the guy you just brought in.
and now he's got the big boy title. He's the guy over in charge of all football.
It's top
know?
dog.
So
Top dog.
I do wonder if that was something that was agreed upon or something that showed up because of these rumors or something like that. Because you got to think, if you're the big boss, if you're Cal McNair, if you're Hannah McNair, if you're a part of the decision making at NRG Stadium, and you hear that your general manager might quit, like there you have to have a conversation about it. Like you have to call that employee in and say, what the hell's going on here? And so I do wonder what that conversation was like. And I would assume that Nick Caserio probably said to him, this is silly. This is not happening. And I'm not going anywhere. We got a draft to get ready for.
Yeah. And I mean, it would have been, I mean, I'm sure there's some hiccups, man. Like, this is not what Nick's used to. So sure, there's some hiccups, but he's a relatively young general manager, and the chatter was fun. So the draft, the process of the draft started out with belief that maybe CJ Stroud would end up in Carolina. Bryce Young folks like myself, many others were thrilled by this. Then it became pretty clear that Carolina was going to go with Bryce Young. Speculation begun. Could the Texans not take a quarterback? Are they going to take a quarterback? I would say a week before the draft, CJ Stroud and at least his team had no idea that he was going to be the pick at 2. I have that on pretty damn good authority. I didn't believe that either, but somewhere along the way, the Texans decided that their top player, we believe, Will Anderson, was going to somehow be a Texan, but we had no idea. Were they just going to take Anderson and then cross their fingers that Will Levis was there at 12? What was going to happen? And then it got real crazy. Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft comes out. Wild projection. CJ Stroud 2. Trade with the Arizona Cardinals at 3. Texans move up. They draft Will Anderson, and I'll be damned if on draft day that doesn't happen, and the Houston Texans end up with Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. One of the most exciting, not saying it's like who knows how it ends up, but I would say that has to be one of the most exciting drafts for a team, maybe in NFL history. I mean, I don't even know, like, you're drafting twice in the top 3. You're taking the quarterback, and then you're getting a guy who many people consider to be the top guy. It's got to rank as one of the most exciting days in franchise history and one of the most exciting draft days of all time.
Well, this is the kind of stuff that only happens in Madden, and Nick Caserio pulled it off in real life. I mean, every year in Madden franchise mode, I was trading for the top 2-3 picks or something like that. And Caserio does it in real life. You got to think too, even the conversation about the number 2 selection, it had a wide range. It was, hey, do they like CJ Stroud? Hey, do they like Will Levis? Hey, could Anthony Richardson find his way into the conversation? No, they like Will Anderson. Well, what about Tyree Wilson, the Texas Tech defensive end? There was a lot of buzz around the Texans and how much they liked him. And ultimately, when it gets to draft night, and then we find out a lot after the fact, the Cardinals have done a pretty good job doing showing some behind the scenes stuff. Caserio explained a lot of it as well. Draft night. This is something that he had thought of and the organization had thought of, the Texans, ahead of draft night. They'd put some of the parameters in place, and Bryce Young goes 1. They look around the room at each other and say, okay, let's execute plan A. And it feels very much like plan A if Bryce Young's off the board, which it became apparent pretty close to the draft that he was going to be, that it was take the quarterback, take the defensive end, and hey, we'll make the trade that we need to make to get there. You still have a first round pick next year. So it's not like you gutted a draft like O'Brien did back in the day. And I know people are concerned about what the pick will be, yada, yada. I'm not worried about that if Will Anderson turns out to be really good and CJ Stroud turns out to be really good, because there was seemingly not a scenario where you were getting both those players without giving up that future pick. It's one of the most exciting moments that I can remember covering as a media member, and then as a Texans fan, it's one of the most exciting moments in the history of the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never really know, like, what the main plan was, but based on conversations with people and based on, we're not pulling it out of nowhere. It was a last-second decision. Whose idea was it? Who knows? I think it's very simple. I had a video about it 2 weeks before. If you're having a discussion in your draft room and one side of the room is pushing for Will Anderson and the other side of the room is pushing for the quarterback, then if both sides are doing their job and laying out their case, then at some point the conversation comes up, well, maybe we can get both of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the path towards getting both of those guys, if that was the plan, is you take the quarterback first, because then with the third pick, the price is lower because people aren't trading up for a quarterback. And that is what I believe happened. Again, not pulling it out of my ass. And it makes logical sense just based on having those types of discussions. It's like if you and I were having a discussion about, what do you want to eat? Well, I would like steak and you would like, I don't know,
Shrimp.
sushi.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a Japanese steakhouse. We can go to the Japanese steakhouse and we can get both of them. Well, it's a little bit more expensive though. Well, you know what? We get to get what we get to get both things that we want. So we're going to pay a little bit more to do that. And that's what I think happened. And we'll see how it works out. Sometimes you take the quarterback, it sets the franchise back. But that's the one thing about this new rookie scale. And I say new, it's been around for a while now. It doesn't necessarily set you back. Like if you're the Arizona Cardinals and you whiff on Josh Rosen, you can just charge it to the game and move on. If you're the Jets and you take Zach Wilson and that doesn't work out, as long as you're drafting well in other areas, then, 2 years after that, you can go all in on Aaron Rodgers and consider yourself a contender, whether that's true or not. So that's another thing that we got to figure out if this goes on. Like, it's easy to say, well, the fate of this franchise rests on CJ Stroud and it's going to be all about CJ Stroud. To a certain point, yes, you want your quarterback to be good. But if Nick Caserio is not drafting well outside of CJ Stroud, it doesn't matter how good he does or doesn't play. And you can make a case that as long as he's doing what Joe Douglas did with the Jets, where you're having these like incredible drafts, that might actually be more valuable than swinging for the fences at a quarterback, especially when you have the extra chips and you have the extra equity like they did and they inherited from the Deshaun Watson situation.
It doesn't quite feel like a knocked it out of the park after the first two draft to me.
No, I mean, and that's the thing as we head into camp, and we'll just kind of transition. That's the thing as we head into camp, and that's really the unknown right now with Nick Caserio is we don't know how good he's drafted, and quite frankly, his first draft class, which we acknowledge he was kind of shorthanded on, it looks like a complete dud at this point. It's gone from optimistic last year to a complete dud, and quite frankly, I don't know how it doesn't end up being a dud. Now, is that the end of the world? Not really, especially if this year's second-year class ends up reaching the ceilings that they have, and they have a much higher ceiling than before. But there's reason for, at the very least, healthy skepticism in regards to the drafting and the job Caserio has done drafting up to this point.
When you approach that 2021 draft class and you don't have a first or second round pick, you're really just hoping for guys that stick around on the 2 deep. And in the first year, those guys were a part of the two deep, and obviously some of them were to an extent in 2022. But here in 2023, with the exception of Davis Mills, who I believe is going to be the backup quarterback, and Nico Collins, who's going to start opposite Robert Woods, like Brevin Jordan's not assuredly going to be on this team. Garrett Wallow's not assuredly going to be on this team, and neither is Roy Lopez. So, like, there's an uphill climb for those guys. And some of the stuff that occurred in the 2022 draft, part of it was, is Caserio smarter than everybody else? Is he the smartest guy in the room? He zigs when other people would have zagged. And, hey, he drafted a corner that had injury concerns and the corner got hurt. So it's like, okay, well, that's not great. He drafted a guard, which has a low ceiling and supposed to have a high floor. Turns out that guard in the first year had a really low floor. Like, that kind of hurt. But Jalen Petrie played really well as a second-round pick when we feel like, I know I do, it feels like they were maybe outmaneuvered a little bit for a running back who looked like he was going to be a pretty good running back before he got hurt in Breece Hall, and they pivot to Petrie. And that's a solid selection. When Christian Harris finally got healthy, that had some potential to it. Damian Pierce was really nice. So, like, there's a little bit of hope that, like, hey, Caserio, pretty unconventional. He has been very different on a lot of the prognosticators and where he ended up valuing players. I think Juice Scruggs is another example of that. Some of the prognosticators, I know Dane Brugler is a favorite of mine. You know, hey, 4th, 5th round pick. They trade up in the 2nd round pick for a center in Juice Scruggs. Like, Caserio's been pretty different on some of these guys. Well, if it pays off, he's going to be putting together a really, really nice roster because he's had the opportunity to take a lot of swings here with those middle rounds.
We'll see what happens. We don't really have to break it down too much because the good news is tomorrow we are about 18 hours away. No, we're about 16 hours away from training camp beginning. So it's going to be fun. We don't even have to break this down. We're going to get a look at these guys, and we'll be able to here in the locker room and on Sports Radio 610 Odyssey app, where we're going to have exclusive interviews and stuff, be able to give you that coverage as well as on Houston football and on Stutz's channel. Cody, appreciate you for coming through. Let the people know again where they can find you.
HOUfootball.com, HOUfootball.com. It's Houston Football. That's the site. And, of course, you can find me on YouTube as well. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff on the YouTube. It's a little ecosystem. You know, you see stuff on the site, it turns into a video on the YouTube. You see a video on YouTube, it turns into written content on the site. And people have been asking me nonstop, Landry, are the Stutzervations coming back? My 11 observations for every practice, yes, they'll be back. They'll be on the site, HOUfootball.com.
Need to be. Look forward to it. Appreciate you, Cody, for coming through. Appreciate everyone for joining. Subscribe, like, ride along. When it comes to this Texan stuff, we are all in it together. Training camp tomorrow. Can hardly wait.
If we got takeaways, if it's up, then it's up. We number one. You don't need to try your luck. Locker room, yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk, yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source, we the pulse of the